Are children the flowers of life? But some of them commit such terrible crimes that even jurors have no choice, only death penalty.
What have they done?
From raping nuns to a series of brutal murders.
My name is Knox, and I'll tell you about 10 such cases.
And you'll decide for yourselves, is death a fair punishment? Larry Roach. On October 29, 1977, Larry Roach, along with Joseph Carl Shaw and Ronald Eugene Mahaffey, spent the morning drinking and using drugs. Typical morning for teenagers, right? That day, they decided to find a victim for rape as well. They arrived at a baseball field outside the city, where they noticed a car with 14-year-old Charlotta Hartness and 17-year-old Thomas Taylor inside. Roach shot Taylor with a rifle after he handed them his money. Then Shaw and Mahaffey put Hartness in the backseat of their car and drove to a secluded road. There, they forced the girl into all the inappropriate things, after which they assaulted her several times. Eventually, Shaw ordered Hartness to lie face down, and Roach shot her. On December 13, 1977, Roach pleaded guilty to murder, assault offenses, kidnapping, and robbery. The court found that Roach suffered from mental retardation and possibly Huntington's chorea,
which could have influenced his actions.
The court acknowledged that Shaw influenced him, but considered that in this case, the death penalty is justified.
And I fully agree with it, but let's move on.
This is just the beginning in my list. Dalton Pridgeon. Early in the morning on July 2, 1977, after a night spent in various bars in Lafayette County, Dalton Pridgeon and his brother with friends left a nightclub in a car driven by Dalton with others in the passenger seats. However, the taillights of the car were not working, which caught the attention of patrolman Cleveland, who was heading to work. He signaled the car to stop. In an attempt to conceal Dalton's lack of a driver's license, the brothers tried to switch places, which the officer noticed. After the stop, the patrolman ordered everyone out of the car, and when he began to search Joseph, Dalton, disagreeing with the policeman's actions, took a .38 caliber revolver from under the seat, got out of the car, and shot the officer without warning, who died from the injuries received. After the shooting, Dalton and his company fled but were detained several hours later. During the pretrial detention, Dalton underwent psychological tests. Dr. William Hawkins, using various methods, determined that Dalton functioned on the border of mental retardation with a verbal IQ of 82 and an overall IQ of 76. As a result, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and unanimously recommended the death penalty. The trial was moved to another district due to the high attention to the case, and after a 3-day hearing in May 1978, the sentence was confirmed. And indeed, one must be a genius to shoot a cop because of a lack of a driver's license. Johnny Frank Garrett. Well, this case caused an incredible resonance in society.
And now you'll understand why.
Johnny Frank Garrett, who was accused of the murder of a 76-year-old nun, Sister Tadia Benz, who lived across the street from his home at St. Francis Monastery. The tragic event occurred on the morning of October 31, 1981, when Garrett was only 17 years old, the age at which criminal responsibility begins in Texas. After his arrest on November 9th of the same year, Garrett was found guilty of assault, strangulation, and murder of the nun. He tortured her for several days. Garrett was held in the death row unit at Elise Unit in Huntsville, Texas, where the death row chamber was located. His execution was scheduled for January 6, 1992, but was postponed after intervention by Pope John Paul II, who appealed for clemency. Ultimately, Texas Governor Ann Richards granted Garrett a temporary reprieve. Despite this, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles voted to uphold the death sentence by a majority vote of 17-1 after a hearing. In the end, despite all the attempts to appeal and arguments in Garrett's defense, he was executed. Reuben Cantu. Let's move on. There are even more cruel kids here. On the night of November 8, 1984, in San Antonio, Texas, a serious crime occurred. Two teenagers, 17-year-old Reuben Cantu and his 15-year-old friend David Garza, broke into a house under construction where they found two men, Pedro Gomez and Juan Moreno. These workers were sleeping on mattresses guarding the construction site from thieves, as a water heater had recently been stolen from there. The young men were armed, and during the robbery, they shot both men. Gomez died on the spot, receiving 9 bullets, while Moreno, although seriously injured, managed to survive. Moreno, who lost 1 lung, a kidney, and part of his stomach as a result of the attack, became a key prosecution witness. After his identification, Ruben Cantu was arrested and charged with murder. Initially, Moreno could not accurately identify Cantu from the photos provided by the police, but later, after several meetings with detectives and a review of the photos, he pointed to Cantu as the assailant. Questioning and identifications took place in a tense atmosphere. Moreno, it was claimed, was under significant pressure from the police, and his statements changed. In addition to this, public and media attention complicated the legal process. The case of a police officer shot by Cantu in the Scarborough Lounge Bar added to the defendant's negative reputation and could have influenced biased attitudes towards his case. In the end, despite the difficulties and contradictions in the evidence, Ruben Cantu was found guilty and executed. However, years after the execution, both Moreno and Garza changed their testimonies. Garza claimed that Cantu was not involved in the crime and that another person was his true accomplice.
That's cruel, isn't it?
Sean Sellers. On March 5, 1986, a shocking murder occurred in Oklahoma City. Sean Sellers shot his mother and stepfather, Fonda and Lee Belafetto, in their bedroom. Sellers, wearing only underwear to avoid getting blood on his clothes, first shot his stepfather. The sound of the shot woke up his mother, and he shot her in the face. To cover his tracks, Sellers attempted to stage the crime scene to create the impression that the murder was committed by an intruder breaking into the house. Sellers also confessed to the murder of Robert Paul Bauer in 1985. Bauer was shot after refusing to sell Sellers beer, and Sellers claimed that at the time of the murders, he was a practicing Satanist and believed that his actions were controlled by a demon named Isurate. He had read Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible many times and considered Satanism an honest way of life that gave him control over his destiny. His addiction to the role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons was discussed during the trial. However, Sellers later rejected the connection between the game and his crimes, stating that using his past as an example of the game's consequences was irrational and fanatical. The jury, however, rejected the defense's arguments and found Sellers guilty of multiple murders, sentencing him to death. Shaka Sankofa. Shaka Sankofa was executed on June 22, 2000 for the murder of Bobby Grant Lambert. It occurred in a supermarket parking lot in Houston. Sankofa insisted on his innocence in this crime throughout. He was arrested after a new victim, a 57-year-old woman whom he kidnapped and assaulted, managed to seize his weapon and call the police. He later admitted his guilt in an armed robbery but continued to deny involvement in Lambert's murder. Sankofa's case caused widespread public outrage and attracted the attention of many influential figures and activists. They argued that his conviction was primarily based on the testimony of one witness who claimed to have seen Sankofa killing Lambert in a dark parking lot. This witness later clarified her testimony, stating that she saw Sankofa's face for several minutes, contradicting her initial claim. The jury did not hear her testimony from other witnesses who doubted that Sankofa could have committed the murder based on his height and other characteristics. Other suspects were not questioned,
and there was a lack of physical evidence.
And despite the complexity and controversy of the case, as well as international calls for a fair review, Sankofa was executed. Whether deserved or not, we may never know. Napoleon Beasley. Napoleon Beasley, an American murderer, was executed in Texas on May 28, 2002 for the murder of a 63-year-old businessman, John Luttig, committed in 1994 when Beasley was only 17 years old. The events took place on April 19, 1994, when Beasley shot Luttig twice in the head in his garage while attempting to steal his Mercedes-Benz. During the attack, Beasley also shot Luttig's wife but missed, and she managed to survive by pretending to be dead. Beasley committed this crime with 2 accomplices who later became prosecution witnesses. Both were sentenced to 40 years in prison. During the appeals process, 3 judges of the U.S. Supreme Court rescued themselves due to personal ties to J. Michael Ludwig, the victim's father, and a federal judge in the United States, leaving only 6 judges to consider the case. Beasley sought justice through numerous judicial avenues. His petitions and appeals were repeatedly denied, and ultimately, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals upheld his sentence. Beasley's execution drew significant public attention and media coverage, sparking debates about the fairness of the death penalty, especially regarding juvenile offenders. Scott Hayne. Have you noticed that most juvenile crimes occur in groups, not alone? It was the case this time too. On October 6, 1987, Hayne and Robert Lambert stole a car in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with Michael Houghton and Laura Sanders inside. After the theft, Hayne and Lambert stopped the car, robbed the couple, and then locked them in the trunk. To complete their villainy, Hayne set the car on fire, resulting in Houghton and Sanders burning alive. Both criminals were arrested on October 9 of the same year. And in 1988, at trial, Hayne and Lambert were found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. However, in 1994, the appellate court ruled that the jury had not been properly informed about the possibility of imposing a life sentence without parole, giving Hayne the right to a new sentencing hearing. Despite this, at the retrial, Hayne was again sentenced to death, and all subsequent appeals were rejected. Gerald Lee Mitchell. On June 4, 1985 in Houston, Texas, Gerald Lee Mitchell committed a felony. Charles Angelo Moreno, along with his 15-year-old son-in-law Kenneth Fleming, drove to Lincoln City Park in Houston for the purpose of purchasing marijuana. There, Mitchell and another man approached Moreno's car, a Trans Am, and offered to sell them marijuana. Both men got into Moreno's car and directed him to one house. Mitchell got out of the car to retrieve a handgun, which he had hidden in his belongings. When he returned, he forced Moreno and Fleming to drive to a dead-end street where Mitchell retrieved the shotgun, demanded the keys to the car, and attempted to force Moreno and Fleming into the trunk. When they refused, Mitchell forced them to walk to an abandoned house. On the way, he took Moreno's wallet. Upon entering the house, Mitchell said, "Put your hands up, white boy. You don't want to die with your hands down." He then shot Moreno in the chest. Fleming curled up in a ball, and Mitchell shot him as well. Fleming heard Mitchell reloading his shotgun and said, "You in the white shirt, I guess you ain't dead yet, white boy." Moreno died of a chest wound. Fleming, wounded in the chest, thigh, and arm, managed to survive by playing dead. Donald Newsom, who was walking by the abandoned house, heard gunshots and saw Mitchell coming out of the house with a shotgun on his shoulder. When Mitchell saw Newsom, he laughed and said, "You needn't be afraid of me. I was just shooting birds." He then put the shotgun in the backseat of his car and drove away. Mitchell gave a written confession claiming the shooting was accidental, but the court didn't believe him and the guy was eventually executed. Toronto Patterson. Toronto Patterson was never an angelic kid. Previously earning a substantial daily income from crack cocaine sales, Patterson was drawn into more serious crimes after his car, complete with expensive chrome and gold wheels, was stolen. Knowing that his imprisoned cousin, Vernon Stiff, had stored a BMW with similarly expensive wheels at the home of his aunt, Evelyn Stiff, Patterson hatched a plan. On the morning of June 6th, Patterson left his girlfriend's home, ostensibly on his way to a physical therapy session for back problems. However, he instead drove his grandmother's car to the home of Evelyn Stiff, where he briefly spoke with her daughter, Kimberly Brewer. After the alleged therapy visit, Patterson returned to the Stiff home. There, he engaged in an actual massacre. He shot Kimberly and her 2 children, 3-year-old Ollie and 6-year-old Jennifer, using a .38 caliber revolver. Each victim was shot in the head, the children were killed, one of them watching cartoons and the other lying on the bed. After the murders, Patterson went to the garage in cold blood, removed 3 wheels from the BMW, and loaded them into his grandmother's car. Unable to move the 4th wheel, he left without taking anything of value from the house. He returned to his girlfriend's house in a confused state, urgently changed his clothes, and confessed to a friend that he had committed robbery and murder in an attempt to rob a man and take his wheels. On June 7, 1995, at a police interview, Patterson submitted 2 affidavits. He first tried to shift the blame to 2 Jamaicans, claiming they were the shooters, and then he did issue a confession. He was eventually executed by lethal injection. In my understanding, there should be no separation of ages, and a person who commits terrible crimes
should know that he will answer for them.
Oh, by the way, if you're close to criminal themes and you know how to write scripts, edit videos, or voiceover clips, then write to our Telegram bot through the description.
Thanks for watching.